let's track this particular discussion, the funding model, and of course the headache that it represents. And of course I have my guest on standby, Mr. Boaz Waruku, an educational expert. Asante sana, Boaz, for making time.
Thank you, Evans, for inviting me to this wonderful discussion.
All right, it's always a pleasure having you. Well, this particular, the crisis that we find ourselves in as a country in regard to higher education funding model that has really left many learners and, of course, parents in a state of confusion, given the fact that the main reason for this model was to actually solve this problem that we find ourselves in. But 1 year down the line, what has changed and what has remained the same? Well, in your own opinion, do you think maybe the old method would have been better than what we find ourselves right in?
Thank you very much, Evans. Indeed, this is a conversation we've had before. And if you remember the last time I spoke about this, I think I was very clear that indeed whoever wanted to change the financing model for higher education in Kenya needed to go deep into the root causes of the challenges or the problems that afflict us, and not just coming up with things from the top of their head. You remember we were digging deep and asking ourselves what treatment was being given or what kind of ailment. Because at the time, you realize that almost every student who had an admission to go to the university had equal opportunity to access certain funding through the help, just to help them with the out-of-pocket and a few other things. But it was guaranteed, almost a given, that every student who had that opportunity would actually just go and get that kind of support. But something really happened, because just at the introduction, remember the introduction of this funding model, the Professor Munavu Working Party was still working on what are the issues to deal with in the financing issue. But then they were hurriedly called to give the second draft report, and this one they said focused on the higher education thing. You remember at that time when they gave the report, they were actually sent back to go and do a better job. But less than a week later, the president himself called the media and announced that indeed he's the one who had discovered a new model, a formula, where he had talked about using some means testing instrument to categorize Kenyan children into certain categories, starting with, actually they were from 1 to 4. They talked of the vulnerable, extremely needy, and then those that needed no other support. But at that time, you realize that those who were vulnerable were not supposed to make any contribution from the household. Indeed, they were supposed to, that part was indicated as being 0%. And then they were supposed to then get a loan. And that loan was almost covering a little bit of almost 40% and some scholarship.
All right.
But now what has happened is that they have created that. Actually, Kenyans may not be aware, but the model they unveiled last year has changed. Mm-hmm. It has changed that right now. It is talking about something else. In fact, we now have 5 categories. And the first category, where it is the most vulnerable, that's the most needy, they are now being asked to pay 5% as a part of the family contribution. And indeed, the kind of abstract manner in which the students or these learners, the applicants, are being posted or grouped into some bands.
All right.
You find those.
Sorry to cut you short on that, and of course now we are talking about the band where we have band 1 all the way to band 5, and now the big question is the rationale now being used to determine that a certain student falls under band 1, band 2, band 5, because all this depends on the household income in regard to this particular method of categorizing students. And the question now is how do you determine that actually this particular student falls under this? Because the question is on the rationale being used to determine this, and this is where most of students find themselves in a state of confusion. Do you think probably there could have been a better way of now using the criteria to determine that this particular student A or B falls under band 1, 2, 3 all the way to band 5?
First, let me indicate you have collapsed band 4 and 5 together. They should be separate. Because band 5 is for the family whose income is above 120,000. But then what I mentioned about this so-called means testing instrument, right now, almost everybody, including those at the Higher Education Fund and the Higher Education Loans Board and the universities and the ministry officials, are now throwing this thing back to the students. They claim that the students wrongfully entered data which were erroneous, And so you start by asking yourself, didn't they have a mechanism of verifying that? Because when they say there are students who are posing like they had parents who are MDs or CEOs of organizations, when these parents actually were struggling and surviving in the villages. So does it also mean that those students whose parents are actually well-to-do, but indicated that they were earning almost nil, were also put in the category of 1 to So I think it is not very clear, but let me get back to the basics. You remember when we discussed this, I said basics are important. What we are struggling with is a case of ensuring that all children in Kenya gain access to education of quality, right from kindergarten to the university. And it is doable based on the resources that we have in this country. I think I did try to unpack the other time the kind of resources that we've been having all along, only that they are misdirected or they are corruptly used by individuals, being transferred from public cause into private interests. So for as long as accountability and transparency is not being utilized or being applied in the utilization of those resources, we'll still be having a problem. Right now, you know that many of these learners, right from high school to the university, they are almost running left, right, and center looking for some bursaries which are scattered all over, scattered in the hands of MCAs, MPs, women reps, governors, even the president's office's own scheme, and then even Jogo House, the head office of the Ministry of Education. They have some special funds there. So you're looking at all these monies dispersed. And cumulatively, this is an amount that as a Livobora, we did quantify and say it is less than, it is more than 100 billion annually. This is an amount which can easily be directed to the schools and the universities, and students be told just to report and learn with very minimal additions coming from external sources. So for me, we are straying from what the constitutional dictates of Kenya are. Everyone has a right to education, Article 43. And indeed, many of those learners transitioning to the university and TVET colleges are still children, because some even go there without IDs. meaning they are below 18. But even when they are past 18 and they have accessed certain benefits, those benefits are not supposed to be discontinued during the pendency of their education in those institutions. So what essentially is required is a mechanism to realize that education should be prioritized and the monies of the funds available ring-fenced and really directed to the institutions so that the infrastructure that is needed to be improved, the equipment that are needed to be done to be procured periodically and replenished, those should continuously be done. As we speak, Evans, the way the universities have costed their programs, it is ridiculous. You remember we started with some universities costing their, Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery in excess of 700,000. And you're asking them, how did they even quantify and come to that? Engineering and all that. Right now, all of them are stabilizing at a figure, they are talking about 500,000. So imagine that almost each and every student is supposed to make that contribution from their own sources. And these are the sources that are supposed to be used for the improvement of laboratories, workshops if they're engineers, equipment, all those kinds of things that are required there.
Okay.
Indeed, it is very unfair to load all these things on a student.
All right.
So that's what as we call, let me just finish that. We are calling for a situation, a funding mechanism that ensures that those facilities are properly developed by funding directly from the taxpayers' money, so that any student and every student going through that, you do not lump on them this heavy funding, which when they exit the universities, they be so debt-laden, they not even know how to turn. Imagine a student leaving university and is being told that they owe Higher Education Fund and Higher Loans Board an equivalent of 2.5 million or plus. How do they start?
All right. And now that, of course, the first group that is of to the class of 2022, the pioneers,
the KCSE of 2022.
Yeah, the pioneers of this should have served as a catalyst test in regard to actually what should be improved in terms of the enrollment issues to do with the IDs, and of course the very confusing school fee structure in regard to many courses like the medicine and of course the engineering, and this vicious circle that keep on repeating itself. Well, then that raises another very critical question. Well, for how long? And do you think there is an end to this, even as we wind up this discussion?
First, I hope you are aware that many of those students who sat for KCSE in 2022, many of them were told to join and not to worry about the funding because funding would come. Mm-hmm. Many have not sat for their exams even as we speak. Some are looking for funding to clear the fees so that they sit for special exams. There are universities that are doing special exams next week, so that they can transition. They are looking for funding so that they clear those balances. I mean, what we are encountering is a situation where we were not so sure what we were going to do with this kind of financing. I think it is high time that we reverted back to where we were before the introduction of this thing, which was fished out of the president's head, so to say, because it didn't come from any research work. Nobody had done any analysis on this. Indeed, what we are having is a situation where even when his own officers are telling us that things will be well, the students are suffering there. You've seen the media actually have been getting students who sat KCSE in 2022 and have not even gotten an opportunity to enroll in any university. Right now, they are being told that you can actually report to the university, and the university have been told to allow you to register according to their own policies. Many of these universities' policies are that you must register and clear with the finance before you can sign that nominal role. So why are we tossing our children left, right, and center? We must make education in Kenya stable. and of quality and predictable, so that when everyone is coming in, they know that they'll start their program in a particular period and end at a particular period. And indeed, Evans, let me tell you, this financing model has actually forced many brilliant students who wanted to do certain STEM courses, engineering, medicine, and all, even law, to abandon those because they look at the cost implications and then they say we cannot afford it, because some did not even clear the fees in their high schools. So it is high time, and I think if the president is very serious that he wants to resolve the issue of education, let us do a reset. Let us look at what are the issues making it very difficult to finance education at the higher education level in a very important, clearer manner. So in that case, we'll be making recommendations that the new CS, this guy called Migos, he should actually sit down with strategic thinkers and key stakeholders to help him resolve this conundrum of always having a situation where we are unable to progress even with new brilliant ideas. Idea of just trying to use bloggers and the media constantly telling us how this model is working when we know it is not working is really not helpful. It is going to frustrate our young ones, and indeed they'll come out of the universities feeling so bitter. We better resolve it right now.
All right.
Otherwise, it will make many of them abandon their programs. Thank you.
All right. And before I let you go, the National Assembly Speaker, Moses Wetangula, actually issued a rallying cry to Kenyans, and his message was just simple. If you have an idea on how we can actually improve this crisis, then you are free and open to bring forth your presentation and, of course, the suggestions so that they can make it a law. So I don't know if from your side, do you have something?
I think let us tell Mr. Speaker that is out of order. Mr. Speaker should be knowing that policy processes start from the executive. They give a proposal and they open it up to public participation, meaningful and significant, effective, properly organized public participation, and so that it can be interrogated before it even comes in as a bill to be considered in Parliament. Before that, even if, as I've seen, a number of the MPs are also talking about, let us go for the low-lying fruits, the low-hanging fruits, that talks about the bursaries which are all over, that they want to collapse them. But you see, for them, it is collapsing them to give them a bigger kitty to use in giving out the money again to the students. What we are saying is totally different from that thinking. All these funds should be made available, put together and directed to the schools and the universities and colleges where they are needed most. And a student, once you qualify, you should actually be allowed to get into those universities and colleges, and if need be, if it's because of the accommodation where some extra expenses are required, that can now come in the form of some moderate loan scheme, just like what many of the people went through in the previous system. Why change something that was working? You could have only improved upon it. So let our speaker, Mr. Wetangula, not tell us that you can just direct your views and all that. How many people, even in the first place, would be able to sit down and concretize even an idea and take it where? First, they don't even know how to direct it to that parliament. So let us talk in a manner to bring solution, not being part of the problem that we are having. He knows very well that within his parliament, there are MPs, and in fact, the parliament has even the research departments. All these MPs have researchers. They could have helped in concretizing these ideas very much, so that then we move forward together without causing this rancor that all the people are now having. The hula baloo we see around, people are crying all over. You're seeing a child of bicycle repair being considered that his father is an engineer and as such is capable. I think that is so nonsensical and really demeaning to the very weighty matters we are addressing in the education sector, particularly financing. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Boaz Waruku, of course, for making time to shed some light on this very important discussion in regard to the future of the higher learning education, in regard to the funding models that is currently being used, and of course the one that have really created a sharp division and of course confusion in regard to which this new funding model, which was supposed to be a silver bullet that will cure the funding crisis that many learning institution has been facing for quite some time. Asante sana for making time, and your time is always appreciated.